Rob here, and today we're going to be textually analysing the front cover of the October 17th to 23rd 2016 edition of The Big Issue. That's issue number 1227, one of the set texts you need to be studying for your exams. Now, what kind of things we've got on here? Okay, now, first of all we need to be considering semiotics. This idea from Roland Barthes that texts communicate their meanings through a process of signification. So what is signified? What is denoted? What is connoted by that? So this idea that signs can function at a level of denotation, that's the literal or common sense meaning of the sign, and the level of connotation, so the meaning is associated or suggested by that sign. Obviously the fact that over time meanings can sound to be self-evident, achieving the status of myth through the process of naturalization. We also need to be considering narratology, that's Tsvetan Torodov. We need to consider the genre theory by Steve Neal, structuralism by Claude Levi-Strauss, any kind of postmodernism by Jean Baudrillard in it. And of course, importantly, the representations, theories of representation by Stuart Hall and David Gauntlet. Any feminist theories in there, like Lisbeth Van Zunen or Bell Hooks or Judith Butler, we can put into it, Paul Gilroy for post-colonialism, stuff like that. Now, what can we say about this then? Okay, first of all, in terms of genre, for example, we need to consider the generic elements, the generic conventions. Now, this is the front cover. What's very difficult to see on here is the masthead. The masthead is blue on blue, and it's almost impossible to read on this computer screen. In the actual physical copy of the magazine, the kind of like the masthead is done in a very shiny, kind of metallic looking material that actually makes the font stand out in a way it doesn't in this digital reproduction. And then this is one I literally scanned off the real edition. A digital PDF version of this entire magazine, not just the set pages, is available on Moodle or of Educast's website. So up here we've got the date line telling you the date that it's released. Again, this is weekly, so with things like Vogue, the magazine is usually released a month in advance, so the July issue would have hit the newsstands in June. This is different, it's weekly, so it's going to be more particularly relevant and up to date. Comes out every Monday. As you can see, it costs £2.50 for the consumer, of which £1.25 of that is kept by the vendor. Right, so what have we got here? Our main cover art. No photograph on this. This, of course, is a completely digital construction. So one of the things you have to look about is how technologies have influenced the production of the magazine. Well, back in 1965, when Vogue was being produced, there was no desktop publishing, there was no Quark or InDesign, there was no photographic manipulation technology like Photoshop. Photographs would be manipulated using what they call an airbrush, which is basically just a spray paint machine. So they didn't have the ability to artificially create images like we have nowadays. Typesetting therefore wasn't as sophisticated. There wasn't as much variety of fonts as you'll get on a modern desktop publishing package. You couldn't mess around with them as much, so they couldn't be as avant-garde and interesting in the design as a modern magazine can. Having said that, if you go back and look at some of the stuff that Dadaists and things like that were doing back in the 20s, they had the ability to do some pretty interesting stuff. But you didn't really see so much diversity and variety in design in those days as you would nowadays. Go and look at a magazine like Wired, for example, and look how beautiful that design is. That would have been really possible back in the 60s. Anyway, all this main cover art here, obviously computer generated. This would have been done through image manipulation, probably in something like Adobe Illustrator, I'd imagine. Anyway, down here we've got this banner, which is what you call these covered boxes you get text in. Script font, celebrating with. And then in this, what looks like Century Gothic font, interestingly, the same font that was used throughout Vogue for its like headers and department running heads and things. Got a list of people who are in this particular issue. Celebrities. So these are kind of like your ideal selves, aren't they? You know, that Carl Rogers idea. Again, it's sort of like representations that we look up to. You know, these aspirational role models, as you know, David Gauntlet and Stuart Hall would talk about. But there are a variety. So there's sports personalities like Andy Murray, politicians like Theresa May, ex-sportsman, more like football managers, Sir Alex Ferguson, Nicola Sturgeon, Scottish politician, the Dalai Lama, religious figure, actors like Daniel Radcliffe and Julie Walters, singers like Paul Weller, Sheridan Smith, Sadiq Khan, politician, Michael Palin, actor, Grayson Perry, artist, Betty Boothroyd, politician, Benjamin Zephaniah, Street Cat Bob, not even human, Joanna Lumley, actress, Arctic Monkeys band, Jon Snow, that would be the newsreader, not the Game of Thrones character, Colin Farrell, actor, Caroline Lucas, politician, Mel C, musician, Christopher Eccleston, actor, Yanis Varoufakis, whoever that is, and many more, plus the thousands and thousands of vendors which they're putting in capital letters and in yellow to make a contrast, make it pop with the background, because they're the real heroes of this story. But these are sell lines. They're there to, well, more actually a cover line really than a sell line, but it's there to attract the audience. The selling line of this is a hand up, not a hand out. It ties in directly with the magazine's ethos of being not a charity, but as a sort of an actual business where people can earn money to give themselves self-respect. If we look at the semiotics and the iconography here, obviously they put their name up in lights, like it was a premiere of a Hollywood film. These are supposed to be what they call Klieg lights with giant spotlights that to this day they'll still use outside of premiere. So this looks like the marquee outside of a cinema with all the names, or a theatre with the names up in lights. Also somewhat reminiscent, I guess, of the Hollywood sign, with the hills behind it and the framework, or maybe the sign of a Las Vegas casino. Neon. This is meant to be neon. These are meant to be obviously light bulbs. So again, this looks like what you get outside an old cinema. So again, this idea of celebration, this idea that they're stars. So these are stars, and you've got stars in the sky as well. Stars associated with wonder and celebration and things that are heavenly. This arrow here is interesting. It suggests that in 25 years and into the future, 25 years of a publishing revolution. So what they're doing here is putting it into an industry context. They're talking about the fact that what they're doing is something radically different to what the typical magazine industry does. It's not like Vogue. They're actually, really, when you think about it, in completely different businesses. They've got completely different reasons for existing. It's like the difference between like BBC Radio as a public service broadcaster and someone like Capital as a commercial broadcaster. They're actually really in totally different businesses. Now, that's not to say there isn't advertising in this, which I suppose makes it a little bit more like Channel 4, which is both a public service broadcaster and, has advertising revenue to help pay for it. So it's not like there aren't adverts in the big issue. Because what you can consider is, how does the big issue exist? Right? So you're selling as a vendor this magazine for £2.50. Of that £2.50, you're keeping 50% of it. That goes straight into your pocket. The rest of it obviously goes back to the big issue. So the cover price, only 50% of the cover price is going back to the publisher. So that will probably only barely cover the magazine's production costs. The costs of actual, producing it and distributing it. Again, the other thing that's different to say Vogue. Vogue is sold not only online, so you've got your digital editions, but it's also available in you know, your major retailers now, whether that be your local supermarket, Asda, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Waitrose, whatever it happens to be, but it's also available in news agents like WH Smith's, places like that. Even Costco sells Vogue. But that's not true of the Big Issue. The only place you can get the Big Issue is from street vendors, which makes it different because it doesn't have that digital presence that seems to be increasingly important in the online age, because it would destroy the reason for the magazine existing. So obviously they've got a lot to celebrate, and they're using celebrities to grab people's attention, and, you know, from the celebrities' point of view, it makes them look good too, because it makes them look caring and sharing, doesn't it? Again, like I said, this Century Gothic font is quite posh and sort of like sophisticated looking. You can't see the Big Issue logo on here. As I said, it's too dark, but again, it's a display font, makes it stand out, easy to read. But look at the way this pops against this blue background, this sort of midnight blue sky in background. The orange and the red really, really pop, stands out, just like it was neon. And of course this is shiny and looks celebratory as well. I mean, it's not something you usually do on the Big Issue, it's something they just did for this issue because they were celebrating. So these must have cost more money to produce than a typical issue of Big Issue. You know, I guess we're talking about, you know, I would like to say that on general, a lot of these people are known for being maybe quite left-wing themselves. I mean, someone like Paul Weller, obviously known for being particularly left-wing. But you can't say that of, obviously, Theresa May. You know, who was at the time the Conservative Prime Minister of the UK. But, you know, you might argue that it, you know, it's the policies of the very party that put off the people on the streets in the first place. But, you know, whatever. So, you know, it's still important that someone like that, you know, wants to make them look caring. So they put their name on to the front cover. Apparently, though, not as important as Andy Murray. So, we've got the front cover there. Right. Next up, we'll be looking at the contents page. Not a massive amount to talk about on this. Obviously, actually, when you think about it, though, the Big Issue for the Masthead, if you think about the connotation of that, is, of course, it's a double entendre. It's got double meaning. It's a pun. Yeah? Because it means issue as in something like as a topic of debate. The issue of homelessness. But issue is something that, you know, we give it to a particular copy of a magazine. And, you know, it's saying that this is a big issue. It's a topic that needs debating. But it's also saying this issue, this particular issue of this magazine is big. So, you know, double meaning there, isn't there? Okay. On the next video, we'll look at the contents page.